from Israel, Gaza, and West Asia to closer home in Bangladesh and Maldives. A diverse set of geopolitical developments have been playing out at the same time. Against this backdrop, we have with us Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary of India, to help us understand what these events mean for New Delhi. Welcome, Mr. Saran. Welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Months have been a perfect illustration of the supposed Chinese saying, may you live in interesting times. It's been a busy time when it comes to geopolitical events. Would you agree, Mr. Saran?
Most certainly. I think things have been changing virtually by the day. So we are certainly living in interesting times, perhaps very turbulent times.
So let's start with the conflict in Gaza. On November 22, Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire in Gaza for at least 4 days. The agreement involves the release of at least 50 hostages captured by the militants in exchange for at least 150 Palestinians jailed in Israel. There are hopes that the ceasefire could be extended even further. So, what are your thoughts on the future direction of the conflict and the implications for India?
I think, of course, this 4-day ceasefire and the limited exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners who are there in Israeli jails certainly counts as a first very positive step since this war began. So this is something we should, of course, welcome, and the world has, in fact, welcomed it. Now, whether or not this 4-day ceasefire could be extended, whether there would be further, exchanges of prisoners and hostages, this is something which remains to be seen, because there are so many things which can go wrong in the meantime. Even with respect to the current agreement, there is still the possibility of many a slip between the cup and the lip. So we should be a little cautious in assessing what the importance of this ceasefire is. But as I said, other things being equal, this is certainly a positive step forward and carries the potential of being further expanded to perhaps, extend the ceasefire, to allow more relief material to be sent to Gaza, some relief for the people of Gaza who has been suffering really from repeated bombings and military operations. There has been a huge loss of life, particularly of women and children. So one cannot but welcome this. Now, as far as India is concerned, as you are aware, that when the Hamas attack took place against the Israeli settlements across the border, and a lot of lives were lost, Israeli lives were lost, the government of India and Prime Minister Modi was very quick to condemn this as a terrorist act and expressed solidarity with Israel. My own view is that that was an appropriate reaction in the circumstances, because there is no way that you can justify the killing of innocent men, women, and children. So I do not take issue with that. With respect to a more balanced kind of Indian stance, well, a few days later, India did reiterate its consistent position that the only way to resolve this long-standing conflict is by implementing something which has already been agreed upon. Agreed upon both by Israel as well as by the Palestinian Authority and endorsed by the international community as part and parcel of the Oslo Accords. Those accords have not been repudiated either by Israel or the Palestinian Authority. So our position is very consistent with the international stance that the only solution, long-term solution to this problem is, in fact, a two-state solution. So we have reiterated that. The crunch will come when, we have to consider the Israeli demand that we should declare Hamas as a terrorist organization. You are aware that just a few days ago, Israel declared the Lashkar-e-Toiba as a terrorist organization, thereby, in a sense, acceding to a long-standing demand from India that if we want to deal with international cross-border terrorism, then these groups must be identified and they should be excoriated. So in that sense, there is a certain pressure on us now to take a public stance and declare Hamas as a terrorist organization, which so far we have not done. So let us see what the government of India's future stance is going to be. But let me say that this ceasefire, to some extent, has relieved some of the pressure that we have been feeling since the start of this particular war.
So the sense I'm getting is that this is a good development, the ceasefire, but there's a lot of uncertainty that remains. And
Certainly.
India, while it might relieve some pressure in India too, as you rightly pointed out, when it comes to Hamas and its designation as a terrorist organization, I think India might continue to face pressure there if the conflict continues. India has invested a lot in building close ties with Gulf nations. We have long-standing relations with Iran. And Israel and India's strong defense and security cooperation is time-tested. So, do you think New Delhi has been able to effectively balance its interests?
Well, so far, until the start of this war, yes, you could say that India has been remarkably successful in maintaining its close ties both with the Arab nations as well as Israel, and also importantly, perhaps not to the same extent, with Iran as well. Because these are the major actors as far as West Asia is concerned. But there is no doubt that as a result of this war, this kind of very smooth sailing, in a sense, of being able to have relations with all the key actors and good relations with all the key actors, that has been coming under strain. No doubt about that. Because, the whole assumption that the American effort to mainstream Israel into the security architecture of the Middle East, and be recognized as a legitimate power in the region. And also encouraging, as you saw, the establishment of formal relations between Israel and the key Arab states, with the exception of Saudi Arabia. Now, we were also perhaps riding on the assumption that this trend is irreversible, that the Palestinian issue is no longer a very live issue. It has been effectively, in a sense, marginalized. And the future is that the countries of the Gulf, the key players, are going to now establish formal relationship with Israel, and their relations will improve. So if you look at the sort of grouping I2U2, which is Israel, India, the US, and UAE, that particular grouping, which is in a sense, people are looking at it as the Western Quad, like parallel to the Quad in the Indo-Pacific. Now, that was based on the assumption that this trend towards closer relationship amongst the Arab states and Israel, this is not going to get reversed now. Thanks to this war, that particular assumption is now somewhat suspect, right? Because if Saudi Arabia has publicly declared that for the foreseeable future, there is no question of Saudi Arabia being able to formalize relations with Israel, although that was on the cards just before this conflict broke out. And perhaps it is that particular possibility which may even have triggered the Hamas attack on Israel in order to prevent that from happening, and sort of the Palestinian issue being completely marginalized, completely sidelined. So I think for us, we have to reassess those assumptions. That our assumption that this is now something irreversible is no longer correct. We have to revise our position, and we see how we can best look after our interest in the changed circumstances. What are the changed circumstances? The changed circumstances are that our assumption that we could, in parallel, pursue very close relations with Israel on the one hand, pursue very close relations with the Arab countries on the other hand, that particular assumption is now under some pressure. Okay, not reversed completely, but it is under pressure. Secondly, implicitly, we had also, in a sense, accepted that the American effort to try and marginalize Iran as a major actor in the region, that also to some extent has been successful. So we have not made a very major effort to try and enhance our relationship with Iran in the same manner, for example, that China has done. So implicitly, we have accepted that, we, as a result of the moves which are taking place here in the region, India will have to, in a sense, to some extent, diminish its very close relationship with Iran. Although we have maintained cordial relations with them, but it's a question of emphasis. The emphasis is not as much as it was before on our relationship with Iran. Now, Iran, as you can see, is back center stage as well. Because, if you are looking at a possible, solution to this problem of Hamas, there is also attacks taking place from Hezbollah onto Israel. If you want restraint by the Hezbollah, then again, Iran is a crucial actor. And you have seen how the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince has been in constant touch with the Iranian president. This would have been unthinkable some time ago. So it's almost as if, the two key actors in the region have realized that they also have to engage with each other and work with each other in order to keep the situation under control in the region, not necessarily with the sanction or the approval of the United States of America.
So the sense that I'm getting is that some of the assumptions that were underpinning India's foreign policy and geopolitics in the region in West Asia, they may have come undone. Not entirely, but
not
to
undone.
some extent.
That is too strong a term to say it have come undone. But, certainly it means that we have to do some course correction as a result of these moves. For example, this was the assumption behind our, signing on to the India, Middle East, Europe corridor at the last G20 summit. Now, not only is Israel a very key part of that grouping, but Saudi Arabia is a key financier of that project. Now, that particular project hangs in balance. It is difficult for me to see.
Coming to the corridor,
yes,
I remember. So when we spoke after the G20 summit in New Delhi, you gave a prescient warning that a possible conflict involving Israel could threaten the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Now, recently, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman acknowledged that the IMEC initiative was facing challenges due to the current conflict. So what will be the corridor's future going forward? What will the future look like for the corridor now?
Well, some people are saying that the first part of the corridor can still go ahead. That is between India and the Middle East. The part of the corridor which involves Israel may be the one which may not fructify in the near future. So maybe a partial corridor, not a full corridor. But we should also recognize that there is a competing Belt and Road Initiative as well, which is promoting connectivity also in the region, going through, for example, Turkey. Now, obviously, as a result of the stalling of this corridor, the attractiveness of the alternative corridors will become much better. So this will mean a certain change in the regional balance. So, for example, Turkey, which would have been left out of the other corridor, will now play a more important role. So its regional role will be enhanced. And if China is back again as the major actor in terms of building up infrastructure, then obviously its profile will also go up.
So would it be right to say that the corridor is actually, it is in real jeopardy? Because the full extent, its full potential of being able to connect us to
Yeah.
Europe, that does not seem to be something
No,
feasible.
we will have to wait and see what happens, because, as I said, Israel was a key component of that corridor, with Haifa port acting as a very major, important, outlet. That no longer seems to be possible in this current state of relationship between Israel and the Arab countries.
Noted, Mr. Saran. So you also mentioned China and that its role could now grow again because it might be the primary infrastructure facilitator in the region once again. So on that topic, the conflict in Gaza has seen China and Russia make gains among Arab and Muslim majority nations at the expense of the US. Do you think that Beijing, in particular, has used the situation to step up its international role and gain more influence?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, there are no two ways about it. So you would have seen that a large delegation of Arab and Islamic countries recently visited Beijing, and in fact requested Beijing to play an important role in trying to address the very dangerous security situation prevailing in the region. And China, don't forget, like India, is very heavily dependent upon energy supplies from the region. And therefore, in a sense, it has what may be called a legitimate interest in how the situation evolves in the region. But the fact that most of the Arab countries and a lot of the global South as well is looking at the US role as a very partisan role, as a great demonstration of double standards by the West. Because on the one hand, you are telling us that Putin is a war criminal for some of the acts carried out in Ukraine. Here, even though Israel has been perpetrating far worse atrocities on the people of Gaza, whatever may have been the impulse for that, there is not a word from any of the Western countries. So obviously, this is glaring double standard. That on the one hand, you are declaring Putin as a war criminal and taking him to the International Criminal Court. On the other hand, you are not even willing to put pressure on Israel to even sort of slow down its offensive in Gaza. So there is a negative sentiment which has built up, not only against Israel, but very much so against the United States and the Western countries. Now, that is good news for both Russia as well as China. And you should also take into account the fact that the ability of the United States, which, yes, it is the only superpower which has a global reach today. It is certainly the strongest military power in the world. It is still the largest economy in the world. But even a country as powerful as the United States of America has certain limitations. It is also already involved in a war in Ukraine. Helping Ukraine against Russia. It is already facing tremendous amount of pressure and military threat in the Indo-Pacific region. It is not very clear what may happen, for example, with respect to Taiwan, if in the forthcoming elections, the DPP wins the elections again. So faced with already two live situations, both in Europe as well as in the Indo-Pacific, now it has to face a third, conflict zone. It is not possible even for the strongest country in the world to be exposed on three different fronts across the world. So this is also the reason why the US has taken the initiative to try and at least bring about some degree of détente in its relationship with China, recognizing that it cannot do all these things at the same time. It cannot fight on three fronts all the time. So there has been, I think, a conscious move on the part of the United States to try and repair its relationship with China to the extent that it can now at least focus its attention on the two other conflict zones, that is both Europe as well as the Middle East. That is my reading of the situation.
So, taking forward what you said, with the US's attention divided across three fronts, and with some of its influence eroding in West Asia and China's influence growing, how can India respond to this? What does this mean for India in West Asia?
Well, one is to the extent that the very close relationship, strategic partnership with the United States of America is part and parcel of our trying to put some constraint on the aggressive and expansionist behavior on the part of China. Now, of course, we have to carefully monitor what is happening in US-China relations itself, because there is no doubt that if there is a significant improvement of relations between the US and China, this will certainly shrink our own room for maneuver. So this is a relationship that we should watch carefully. I know that some people have been saying that, oh, this really, the recent summit between Xi and Biden was more of a tactical gesture, that structurally the two countries are still, very much long-term adversaries. That may be true to some extent, but, even tactical moves do matter. So if there is going to be, because the US is facing this pressure, both in the Middle East as well as in Europe, it may feel that at least there is no live conflict taking place in the Indo-Pacific. So in a sense, for US, it is a comparatively more peaceful theater than the Middle East is or Europe is. And therefore, you can afford to make some concessions there if you can't make concessions in the Middle East or in Europe. So if the US feels that it has to readjust its stance or posture towards China and to bring about a degree of, better relationship with China, naturally, it means that our diplomatic space, which is based on the assumption that for the foreseeable future, China-US relations will remain very adversarial, and the US will need India in order to countervail Chinese power in the region, that may have to be reassessed. I'm not saying that that will completely change, but, diplomacy, like economics, operates on the margins. So a little more or a little less. So it will mean that the US interest in India as a countervailing power to China may somewhat diminish.
So that actually answers a part of our next question. We were going to get to that. Talks were held between US President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping recently, as you mentioned. Agreements on curbing fentanyl production and restoring military communication were reached. And Biden was reportedly confident that the fraught US China relationship was improving. But while departing the summit, Biden still said that he considered Xi a dictator. So, is this also a sign that Xi wants to calm things down with the US? And you did answer part of this. How should India view this development?
Well, I don't think we should be sidetracked by this statement or that statement that Biden may have made. I'm looking at what really is the substance of what was achieved at the summit. So one is that the very fact that despite the so-called very fraught relations between the two countries, that both found it worthwhile and in fact even necessary to have this summit itself tells a story. That it is something which both sides considered to be an important, move on their part. So we should recognize that. Yes, on the Chinese side, it may have been because of the fact that its economy is slowing down. There is perhaps some more negative sentiment with regard to the Chinese economic prospects. You saw that President Xi Jinping made a very major speech to the American CEOs in San Francisco, telling them that China is open for business, that China would do everything possible to make it a much more congenial destination for investment. China will remain open and will open even further. So those messagings, obviously, they are related to, excuse me, what is the difficult situation, economic situation that China is experiencing. And most people, most economists are of the view that this is not going to change in a hurry, that China will probably experience somewhat low rate of growth in the maybe 3%, 3.5% over an extended period of time. So the role of China as the most important engine of growth for the global economy, that has declined somewhat. So I can see why China may have felt necessary that it needs to maybe respond to the United States at this time because of the fact that it is facing economic headwinds. That is one factor. But the second factor would be a sense of opportunity, precisely for the reason that I mentioned. If China sees that the US is preoccupied in Europe, that US is preoccupied, for example, in the Middle East now, this means that it is now somewhat on the defensive. Therefore, having a summit at this time may be more beneficial to China. So there have been several factors which have actually been behind this decision of the two leaders to meet. But I think there is also a sense, both in Russia as well as China, that US is going to be so preoccupied with what is happening in the Middle East that the pressure that they have been facing on the Ukraine war, that also will diminish. You already see that there is some kind of a fatigue, Ukraine fatigue in US as well as in Western Europe. So in that sense, the pressure that the Russians and the Chinese were facing just about a year ago as a result of the Ukraine war and the inability of the Russians to be able to really conclude this war, that has now also been relieved to some extent. The world's attention also has been distracted away from Ukraine to now what is happening in the Middle East. Similarly, as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, there is now perhaps less US pressure likely on, say, the Taiwan issue than was the case before. So you saw that at the summit, Biden was very careful in terms of what he was saying on the Taiwan issue. He reiterated very explicitly that there is only one China. While we are interested in peaceful reunification of Taiwan with the mainland, we do not question the fact that there is only one China. So there have been some shifts, tactical shifts, which show that there is a keen interest both on the part of China as well as on the part of the US to try and improve their relations so that they can handle some of the other challenges that they have better than before.
So the main message that I am getting, and perhaps the viewers will get, is that India will have to reassess its relationship between US and China. It is going to have to see that relationship, the US-China relationship, it will have to track that very carefully and reassess some of its own positions vis-a-vis how important it is for the US and how much it can take on China going forward. Is that the right way to look at this, sir?
Again, as I said, it is not that this assumption is overturned, but the strength of that assumption maybe is less than what it was before. That if we have taken the position that US-China relations are structurally adversarial and are likely to remain adversarial going forward because, it is a fight between number one and number two. It is a fight between a superpower trying to retain its primacy and a competitor which is trying to unseat that number one. Now, to the extent that even if that relationship has not changed, there is some slowing down in terms of that competition. There is an attempt on both sides to try and limit that rivalry. Naturally, the role that India will play in this equation will also undergo some change. So not that this will somehow, completely diminish India's role in US eyes as a countervailing power. to China, but it will certainly reduce its salience, which will have its diplomatic consequences. And it has always been my view that we should be watching this relationship very carefully going forward, because if you perceive that there could be a time as a result of various kinds of developments across the world, that the US and China feel that they need to come to some kind of an understanding as to how they manage the global geopolitical landscape. Okay, that let's have, remember there was a time when we talked about the G2, that, the US and China come to some kind of an understanding where US respects China's so-called core concerns and China respects what are US core concerns. And while they may compete, but essentially they sort of have an understanding on how to manage the global situation. Now, in that respect, if, for example, these various tactical moves start pushing events again in the direction of a G2, then naturally this will be a matter of great worry for India. Because, if the US for its own global interests and China for its own global interests come to some kind of an understanding, then it stands to reason that for China, the most important region is Asia. For the US, the most important regions are Europe as well as, the Americas. Now, they will obviously, if there is a trade-off, it's more likely that China will get a larger share of influence in Asia if the US insists on a larger share of influence, say, in Europe and America. Something like some spheres of influence of the past. Now, if China is recognized as the predominant power in Asia, naturally that is not good news for India. India has rejected any kind of a hierarchical, security architecture in Asia. It does not recognize that there is any primacy that China needs to enjoy because of its, larger economy or because of certain historical, memories that China has of being the most important power in Asia. We reject that. So if the global equation moves in a direction which in some sense adds legitimacy to China's position in Asia, that of course is not good news for India. I don't think India would accept that. So then trying to constrain Chinese aggressiveness, Chinese expansion of influence in the region will become that much more difficult for India than perhaps it is today.
So clearly, the sense that I'm getting is that there are challenges ahead for India, no doubt. And India is going to have to tread carefully. Coming to our next question, Mr. Saran, and we now come closer home. Maldives' new president, Mohammad Muizzu, wants India to withdraw its military from the country. Given that the coalition backing him is considered pro-Beijing, what are the implications for New Delhi?
Well, obviously, the change in government in the Maldives does mean that our relationship with the current government in that country is going to be somewhat, challenging is a is a very mild word, but we will certainly face, headwinds in that country. But you will see that we have been very careful not to react in a very negative manner to some of the statements being made by the new president. The idea is to try and deal with these issues on a low key, and I think that is the right way to go about it. As far as the withdrawal of some of the Indian forces are concerned, in any case, the Indian presence was a very small presence, essentially to help the Maldivians deal with issues of, for example, policing of their exclusive economic zone, because there are so many islands that constitute the country. It has a very large exclusive economic zone, and it finds it very difficult to look after that very large space. So some of the presence that India has had in the island country has essentially been to help the Maldives, not to maintain a kind of a base there or to maintain a military presence there. So if the Maldives does not want that kind of support and assistance, it is really up to them. I think the fact is that with regard to whether it is the economic and commercial relationship, whether it is in terms of having India as one of the key security providers to the region, not just the Maldives, but the entire Western Indian Ocean region. India's role will be there, whether the relationship with the Maldives is not as good as before, or it is as negative as it was even before that. I think we managed to, sail through that particular period with minimal kind of impact on us. We can't wish away China. So China is a very powerful country now. It has a very large navy. So to feel that somehow or the other we can say this is our backyard and nobody else should come in, those days are gone. So we have to present ourselves as a better partner to these countries. We should try to take advantage of our very proximity to these countries. The fact that we are a huge market for the smaller countries on our periphery. All these are assets that we have, which we should utilize as best as we can. That requires a very, a kind of a consistent focus on our relationship with our neighbors. As I have said number of times before, if you cannot get your neighborhood right, then your effort to try and play a bigger regional role or a bigger global role will always be suboptimal. We will always be dragged back, to the neighborhood. If the neighborhood is not stable, if the neighborhood, has economic difficulties or crisis, India will not be able to rid itself of those preoccupations. So it is in India's own interest that it should work towards greater, peace and prosperity in our periphery, so that we can do bigger things, outside this particular region. But at this time, yes, our relations with some of the neighboring countries certainly has improved. With Nepal, for example, with Bhutan, it has always been a very special relationship. With Bangladesh, we have made tremendous progress over the last several years in forging a much stronger relationship. We have also managed to, in a sense, get back into the game in Sri Lanka, because we have taken the right step of stepping in to help them deal with the economic crisis. This has been greatly appreciated in Sri Lanka. So we have, in a sense, regained some of the lost influence in that country. So we should try and see how we can build on those positive trends. The outlier in this respect is, of course, is Pakistan. But my view always has been that, if we want a peaceful periphery, you cannot exclude Pakistan, from your calculations. This is something which should be obvious to anyone.
So you mentioned our two other neighbors, Bangladesh and Pakistan. Let's take up Bangladesh first. So India and the US view the upcoming Bangladesh election in January 2024 quite differently. Washington has been pressuring Sheikh Hasina to hold what it would consider free, fair, and peaceful elections in Bangladesh. Does this indicate that cooperation between New Delhi and Washington in South Asia has its limitations despite mutual interests regarding Beijing?
Well, it has always been the case that India's approach, India's perspectives on its own neighborhood has not always been the same as the US approach. US is very far away, so it is not conscious of the kind of risks that India, confronts with respect to developments in its neighborhood. So I recall, for example, when there was a peace process in Nepal, in 2004, 2005, and the US was not at all in agreement with us that we should try and bring the Maoists into the political mainstream and, for the establishment of multi-party democracy. But through our very regular consultations with the Americans, we were able to at least convince them that they should not interfere with this process, because it was so important to India. I think, given the fact that we have very close kind of security cooperation with the United States, close political relations with the United States, it should be possible for us to talk through whatever differences we have with respect to Bangladesh. Certainly, I think it should be no secret that we would prefer that Sheikh Hasina comes back to power, because let's face it, the real improvement in relations between India and Bangladesh and the establishment of a much closer economic collaboration between the two countries is really something that has been encouraged. It has been something which has been promoted by Sheikh Hasina. You may argue that we should also keep in close touch with other political forces in Bangladesh, and I don't know whether we have, but I think we have now put in place enough assets, cross-border assets, which even if there is a non-Sheikh Hasina government which takes power, the logic of those kind of cross-border cooperative projects will continue to drive the relationship between the two countries.
And the other neighbor, and perhaps our most important neighbor, Pakistan. Now, let's end the interview with the return of a leader who was seen as a friend of India by many in his country. Former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is back in Pakistan, and it seems likely that he'll be back in the driving seat, at least as much as Rawalpindi allows. So, how do you view this development in particular?
We have to be conscious of the fact that there are very real limitations on any political leadership in Pakistan. Ultimately, it is what the sentiment in the armed forces is, which determines how far a political leadership is able to go in managing its relationship with India, in managing its relationship with China, with next door Afghanistan, with the United States of America. So we should be not sort of overplay the significance of a possible return to power by Nawaz Sharif. Because as soon as Nawaz Sharif starts doing things which the army is not comfortable with, the army will do what it has always done, is to try and, sideline that political leadership. So that is one aspect. Second aspect is that, India is going to be going in for elections. First, there will be state elections, then there will be national elections early next year. Whether we like it or not, Pakistan relations have become part and parcel of the domestic political discourse. If there is a communal dimension to the electoral politics in India, then in that communal dimension, Pakistan also gets drawn in. So in that kind of a situation, whether there will be a willingness to really look at possible changes in our policy towards Pakistan, I'm not so sure. Maybe we will have to wait until after the elections are over, and depending upon what kind of political dispensation comes into power. Also, there is every reason why we should really explore some improvement of relations between India and Pakistan for 3 or 4 reasons. One is that Pakistan finds itself in a very difficult economic situation. And there are voices in Pakistan itself saying that one of the ways in which to deal with this economic challenge is really allowing the natural flows of commerce and of trade to flow between India and Pakistan. There have been studies which show that if tomorrow really MFN trade opened up between India and Pakistan, the trade may go up to something like $10 billion or $12 billion. So more and more people in Pakistan are saying that, rather than be having to go in for handouts from the IMF, from the United States, or from the Gulf countries, Why don't we try and see how we can build Pakistan's economy back again to some level of stability by really opening up in economic relations with India, even if we have some political difficulties with India, but there is a certain logic to those economic relations. Secondly, as you have seen with the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan, and literally, sort of abandoning Afghanistan, the main pillar of Pakistan's, policy with regard to this region has, in a sense, been knocked out. Why? Because, it is no longer able to use its so-called influence on the Taliban in Afghanistan to wrest concessions from the United States. The United States of America in the past used to keep balancing its relations between India and Pakistan because there was a view that we need Pakistan's cooperation in order to deal with Afghanistan. That factor is no longer there. And so there is not much interest in the United States really to, in a sense, humor Pakistan or to support Pakistan in the same manner that it did in the past. And the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which was supposed to be one of very close military and political alliance, that has come unstuck. Today, you see that Pakistan is trying to force large number of Afghan refugees back into Afghanistan, and the relationship with the Taliban regime in Kabul has become very, very tense. So the idea that somehow or the other, a Taliban regime in Afghanistan will give so-called strategic depth to Pakistan against India, that Pakistan will be able to use its influence in Afghanistan to also get concessions from other countries, that has proved to be unfounded. The last point, if you go back, say, 10 years, when the China-Pakistan economic corridor was announced, and the Chinese and the Pakistanis themselves said that this was the Belt and Road's flagship project. That is the most important component of the Belt and Road Initiative, a global initiative, was in fact the economic corridor between Pakistan and China. Something like $60 billion was in fact on offer in order to build up Pakistan's energy sector, its transportation sector, the harbor at Gadar. Very large number of projects. And a lot of Pakistanis were saying that this is going to be a game changer for Pakistan. It is going to be a game changer for the region. As you can see, that also has been belied. Pakistan, in a real sense, is also in a debt trap to China. And China has shown not much interest in really bailing out Pakistan from this very dire economic situation that it is facing. So there is a lot of disappointment in Pakistan also over the attitude that China has taken vis-a-vis Pakistan. Now, all this means to me as a diplomat, it would mean that the situation is ripe for us to reach out to Pakistan and to try and see how we can, use this very different a situation which has evolved very differently, to try and see whether we can improve relations between the two countries, reach some degree of understanding between the two countries. Because if we are able to do that, then the strategic picture in the subcontinent will undergo a very big change. But because of domestic factors, because of the suspicion of Pakistan, our focus on cross-border terrorism, we have been very reluctant to follow through on some initiatives with respect to Pakistan. I do hope that after the elections are over, I do not see much change before the elections, but once the elections are over, perhaps there will be a willingness to look at what prospects there may be for India-Pakistan relations.
So the sense that one gets is that, as we mentioned at the start of the interview, these are interesting, meaning chaotic times. And there are some opportunities that may have opened up for India, but there are many more challenges. and India will have to tread carefully going forward. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, I would not say that the picture has suddenly become very dark for India. That is not what I would say. India's enhanced status, enhanced global profile is due to the success that it has made in terms of its economic performance. It is the fastest growing large emerging economy in the world. And it is likely, if we maintain a growth rate of 6 to 7% per annum, it is likely to become the third largest economy within a short period of time. So much of India's enhanced profile draws from that economic fact, in a sense. Other countries in the world are interested in coming to India because of the prospects it offers, are interested in maintaining a good relationship with India, again, because it is, whether we like it or not, it has a important role to play, no matter which global issue or cross-cutting issue you are looking at. So there are enough reasons, very substantive reasons, for India's influence having increased, and that itself gives you greater diplomatic space. So even if there are new kind of situations which are emerging both in our neighborhood as well as, for example, in West Asia or in the Indo-Pacific, the ability of India to deal with these issues has also, in a sense, been enhanced. No, of course, obviously, it will depend upon the quality of your foreign policy, the quality of your diplomacy, how you are able to, deal with what may become crisis situations, and also to profit from opportunities which may emerge. So obviously, after the G20 summit, we have been riding very high as a country which has a very large global profile. To some extent, it was difficult to maintain that kind of a very enhanced kind of profile after the G20 summit was over. As you have seen, the follow-up online summit has not really drawn much attention. So it is difficult to keep attention at such a high level all the time. But still, the fact that there are two other major emerging economies, Brazil and South Africa, which will follow India for G20 chairmanship, it gives us the possibility of working with these other emerging economies to make sure that an agenda which is more aligned with our interests remains the preoccupation of the G20 countries. This is certainly doable, and I think India can certainly has the wherewithal to play that particular role. So maybe a somewhat mixed picture, maybe not as positive a picture as may have been envisaged at the end of the G20 summit, but nevertheless, a situation which is still full of possibilities for India.
So to sum up, the challenges may have gone up, but as you rightly pointed out, so has India's capacity to deal with them. Thank you, Mr. Saran. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for those insightful answers. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.
He's about to land his dream job. Business Standard.